What's a mook?
A mook? What's a mook?
I don't know.
What's a mook?
I mean, they're definitely getting better with the CGI movies that make it look like it's in the style of stop motion, but there's just, when you know it's stop motion, like, you can't beat that. You just know that there's like an effort to
seeing
detail.
something that it's like these images occurred in front of a camera lens is just, there's something magical about that to me that you just can't replace.
Did you see, this movie doesn't really fit into our categories, but did you see Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio?
No, that was just recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, because that's another bona fide stop motion one.
Oh, it's stop motion.
Yeah, and again, just I'm just like, wow, just with CG, I'd kind of just be like, oh, cool. But because I know it's stop motion, it just made me that much more impressed with what I was seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why that was largely why I went to watch Coraline when it came out. Was I was just, I mean, for starters, actually, it did look like a good movie, and again, kind of this dark, humorous sort of thing that's always a bit of a draw for me. But it's so beautiful looking, and when you know that it's stop motion animation, I don't know, there's just something about that which is a work of art, which, I mean, it's kind of like you have to see it. If there's a beautiful painting on display in a museum near you, it's like you have to go because you want to go and physically see this thing that somebody physically painted, you know? It's kind of like a digital painting versus something that's on a canvas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's just something special about a thing that has been manifested in the physical world.
Did you ever see the horror Rankin Bass movie? Because that's probably the one that would be fitting for this. And I'm pretty sure it was... That
sounds great. I should see it, but I haven't.
Tim Burton was a big fan of it, and I actually think it was a big inspiration for Nightmare Before Christmas.
Right, yeah.
But it's called Mad Monster Party.
Oh, fuck. I gotta check this out.
Yeah, and it's kind of like... Mad Monster Party is... I actually only saw it for the first time a few years ago. It wasn't as great as I thought, but it's definitely fun. It's just... It's a very much a product of its times. It's almost like the original Hotel Transylvania, which I've actually never seen any of those movies, but that's the idea I get from it. It's Rankin Bass just doing a stop motion movie with all of the classic Universal monsters. And it all gets together with them having a party.
It's the mommy! It's the mommy!
One of the biggest gags I love about it is the 60s rock band The Zombies, who they get in to be the band in the film, and they're all like done up as like skeletons.
Okay.
But I just thought it was hilarious that they got the zombies in Mad Monster Party. Obviously for no other reason than that they're called the Zombies. But, But yeah, no, Tim Burton was a big fan of it. In many ways, I think Nightmare Before Christmas was kind of his like response to that, or just his love for stop motion was kind of from Mad Monster Party.
That makes a lot of sense.
Rob Zombie, I think, was another big fan of it, and
I think Tim Burton might have even been a fan of the Rankin Bass Christmas movies as well. Like, I think he just kind of developed a bit of a stop motion animation fan, which is interesting because like I have too, and I've sort of thought like, stop motion would be a really cool style to make something in one day.
Oh, totally, yeah.
But
there's actually this great. He was kind of like the godfather of stop motion, and he did this. He's like this Russian Polish guy, and he made the first feature length stop motion animation. But then I also saw a short he did in the 30s called The Mascot. It's also known as The Devil's Ball, and you watch this and you're like, holy crap, like, did Tim Burton see this? Because like that more than anything reminds me of Nightmare Before Christmas.
Is that right? What was that called? And this was a stop motion.
Yeah,
thing.
and you can, the whole thing, there's actually a really nice remastered like 4K version of it on YouTube you can watch.
Oh, I gotta watch this.
And it's about half an hour long. I think it's in French with subtitles, but it's one of those films where there's very little dialogue. It's mainly just visuals.
What's it called?
The Mascot, I want to say like 1933 or maybe 1935. And it kind of starts off very wholesome. It's like it takes place in this girl who's sick and her toys kind of come alive. And it's about this like little like puppy toy that kind of comes alive and it escapes her room and goes on this little adventure. But then it turns into this like spooky thing with these like devil characters and all of these like Halloween type monsters coming around, and it's
And this is stop motion.
it's
you
stop
said.
motion, and it looks like it's straight out of Halloween Town.
Wow.
I would love to colorize this thing, but I remember I watched this like a couple of years ago and was blown away by this thing. I was just like, this is amazing, and more people need to see this.
The Devil's Ball. I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, singular. It's not The Devil's Balls.
Yeah.
That's another movie.
That'd be another movie, which is great, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about the Tim Burton movies, but there's also the very gifted director who directed Nightmare Before Christmas, Henry Selick, who I think is really worth talking about as well, because he's got some other classic works of... In many ways, I actually prefer Henry Selick's stop motion movies than Tim Burton's. Like,
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, which makes sense because, I mean, that's really, that's what he does. Did Henry Selick, did he do Coraline?
yes, he did.
Yeah. I know he did James and the Giant Peach.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'd written that down as a movie to potentially talk about today, but I was like, it's not really a Halloween movie, or I don't think of it as a Halloween movie.
No. Although there's a Jack Skellington cameo, right? There's kind of like a Jack Skellington pirate character in James
Okay.
and the Giant Peach. I would say Coraline is probably a more fitting movie for this episode. If we were to talk about another one of his films, they sometimes make these like CGI movies that are in the style of stop motion.
Right. I kind of thought that Corpse Bride was that when it came out.
Right. Yeah.
I was quite blown away to find out that that was stop motion.
So Coraline was another one that just sort of really surprised me. I never expected it to be kind of as dark of a movie as it becomes, you know? It's definitely a kid's movie. I mean, I guess maybe that's a testament to Neil Gaiman. I've never read his book, Coraline, which I guess is more of... I would imagine it's more of like a children's book as opposed to some of his other material, but Neil Gaiman's great, and I think Coraline is a great movie. Again, I was very sort of surprised by it. It was maybe in a period where I was kind of not watching tons of animations, and somebody recommended it and threw it on, and I was just like, oh wow, this is just a beautiful, like just visually, it's just a very beautiful movie.
Yeah.
And then when it starts becoming like kind of creepy, then I'm just like, oh wow, like this is even catering even more to what I want, which I wasn't even expecting. But when it came, it just made it all that much better. And then knowing that it was made by the Nightmare Before Christmas guy, I was just sort of like, yeah, he made another classic.
Yeah, he really did. And I feel like, while I do feel like Coraline has been remembered, maybe not as well celebrated as it ought to be, because it definitely doesn't have the identity that Nightmare Before Christmas has in terms of how it kind of permeates culture, I suppose. But I do think it's a really fantastic movie. I went and saw it in theaters when it came out, and I was quite excited about it because, I mean, it's just such a rarity that we get stop motion movies in general, you know? It's honestly kind of amazing that anybody even remembers how it's like, it should be this lost art form because of how few movies get made in that animation style. But you know, there is something about the stop motion style, which I think is very it is actually very difficult to duplicate in CG animation, and that's just the physical elements that are at play. Because, for instance, maybe I'll dive into Paranorman a little bit here. With CG animation, you're having to emulate all the elements that are at play, right? Like lighting, for instance, lighting and shadows and stuff like that. Whereas when you create a stop motion set, they light it for real, you know? They're actually shining lights at these things, and it's just, you're bringing elements to the staging of it that are really difficult to duplicate in CG in the same realistic sort of manner. And that's one of the things that I think stands out so much in Paranorman, like the atmosphere that it captures in these kind of magic hour.
It's like the physics become kind of perfect because you're working with real things.
Well, yeah, that's just it. And then at the same time, it's more difficult to do certain physics because if you're having to do a splash of water, say for instance, and you're having to do it frame by frame, like, well, how the hell do you do that? That's its own whole challenge, right? But with things like lighting, And I think that Paranorman, the lighting really stands out to me, again, because they have so many of these sunset shots and stuff. It's like, fuck. To me, that just perfectly captures some of these moments when you were a kid in autumn, you know, riding your bike home from school as the sun was going down, or whatever. Like,
I was really not
it's so nostalgic.
It's funny speaking about nostalgia with Paranorman because it's probably the most recent title on my list of animated movies.
Yeah, probably same here.
And I really wasn't expecting much. In fact, probably I think when I first heard of the movie coming out, I probably in my head thought like, oh, I'm probably never going to see that one. But then when I did, like I was, really surprised at how much I liked it. The stop motion animation, which again, I think I assumed it was CGI. So when I saw that it was stop motion, that impressed me. Like, unfortunately, like it doesn't, maybe it's because I only saw it the one time. It maybe wasn't the most memorable. Like I have a hard time kind of remembering a lot of things from it. It's like kind of just these little moments that really stuck with me. Like, I think there was one part where the main villain's essentially a witch, and there's a part where she's kind of like in the sky and she creates like this giant kind of like skull face. And I don't know why there was like little moments like that just kind of really like felt like kind of real to me, or like kind of hit me like, oh, imagine if I actually like saw that for real in the sky. I don't know why. Like it was like a long time since a movie had given me that kind of a feeling. But then just the fact that it was in an animation, it was really neat. There's something fun about watching a movie and you just have the feeling of, I would have loved this if I was a kid. There was probably a lot of kids around the age when that movie came out who did love it, and I was almost able to just relate to like, wow, like those kids are going to have this whole new generation of a fun, spooky movie that they're going to grow up with. And and Paranorman did that. Yeah,
I felt like I was there with them enjoying that, because like I did go see the movie. Did you see it in theaters?
No, I think we just streamed it.
Okay, yeah, I remember seeing it in theaters. And being quite excited for it before it came out. And again, largely just because I was very into the style and stuff. And yeah, it was like, I watched that movie knowing full well that I was going to watch it, many times over. I think you're right. It does do a very good job of tapping into that inner child. Kids around that time. Like I was, in my early 20s, I guess, when that came out.
Were there sequels? Because it feels like easily picture Paranorman 2 or 3, but maybe it was a standalone movie.
Yeah, that's all they ever did. I don't know how successful it actually was. Yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah, I could see it being one of those kind of sleeper hits that kind of became a success later on DVD or something. But I guess even if it was, it clearly wasn't enough of a hit. Usually if something's a big enough hit, they'll try to make a sequel or two.
Yeah.
So, but there's something nice about when a movie becomes a standalone that doesn't get touched with, a bunch of sort of mediocre sequels.
Yeah, totally. To me, Paranorman feels like, in fact, in many ways, maybe it would have been more successful nowadays because there's a lot of this 80s nostalgia stuff that's very popular at the moment. And to me, Paranorman feels like very much like an 80s nostalgia kind of film.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what I love about it so much. It's like, it's that kind of, I mean, even if you compare it to Monster Squad, which I watched last night, it's almost like an animated version of that in some ways.
Yeah. Even there's some correlations I feel with Coraline, like where Coraline's almost like the female version and Paranorman's kind of like the male version. Is that the male character in Coraline who doesn't really... Or he does speak, but in the Coraline world, he's like a mute. But he's like the one kind of boy, and he kind of rides his bike and kind of teases her. And I'm almost like, oh, he could have been easily like in Paranorman or one of Paranorman's buddies or something like that. And they both have that kind of, that vibe you were saying, kind of like an 80s kids movies where you're kind of riding your bike in the fall with like the leaves falling. And they both kind of give those vibes. And it's weirdly like that kind of stuff gets me more. Like I'm almost more into that like simple stuff than... how, I don't know, elaborate they can make the spooky villain.